on um, the 5 northern counties. So there is so much data out there, um, and easily accessible on the World Wide Web, both on our website as well as the CDC website, as well as the state website. So if I am repeating things that you already know, I apologize. But one thing I want to start with, and I'll end with it as well, is COVID seems to continue to ignore our community's attempt to ignore it in North Idaho. And the data speak to that. The hospitalizations speak to that. The positivity rate speaks to that. The case numbers speak to that. So, you know, we look at what we call gating criteria, which are those 3 things. And really the reason why is because of the hospitalizations, right? Our hospitals' capacity to take care of these people that are really, I mean, they're very ill. They're in the hospital. And today we have 26 of them, with I think 11 in critical care. And the ages are all over the map, right? Teenagers to, I think there's some 70s. I think that was the oldest I saw today. And we've seen a shift in that, right? Used to be a lot of 70 plusers. We're seeing youngers, 30s, 40s, 20s, hospitalized now. And on vents. I think today we had 3 vents. You don't want to be on a ventilator. So, I mean, that's the whole reason all this falderall and fiddly-dee with COVID is because people get really sick. Now, a lot of people get COVID. And you know, if it's you or a loved one that ends up in that ICU, you know, you might think twice about making sure that you're vaccinated and that your loved ones are vaccinated, because you know what, vaccinations work. And we've had as many. I mean, it's certainly COVID I don't want to say it's stabilizing out because we don't know. The only thing we can really control are just those things we've talked about since the get-go 14 months ago. You know, maintain social distance. Don't cough on somebody. Don't get coughed on, because this is an airborne illness. And then vaccines. I mean, we've got 3 types of vaccines out there: the Moderna, the Pfizer, and the Janssen for now here in the 50-50. And they're easily accessible. How many people are choosing to get them? And it's a choice, right? And you can be 12 or up and get vaccinated. In fact, we're experiencing it. We've got some mobile vaccination teams, and there's some, believe it or not, in North Idaho, there's some people that really strongly don't believe in vaccines, to the point where they like to protest and send messages to staff, and just some really ugly behaviors. But nonetheless, we want to offer the choice of folks to be vaccinated, to protect themselves, because if you have 2 doses of these vaccines in you, it's about a 90% rate of you're not going to get the disease, or if you do get the disease, you're not going to end up with a severe form of the disease. You're not going to get hospitalized. Heard a data point the other day in the Board of Health meeting from one of our physicians that every single one, I think at the time there were, I don't know, 23, somewhere we're somewhere always in the 20s now, in high 20s, low, it varies. We had been as high as 90 hospitalizations at the height last year around this time. But he said that every single one of those patients in the hospital had not been vaccinated. I think 2 of them had just had that vaccine like a day or 2 before. And you're not considered fully vaccinated until you're 2 weeks out from your 2nd vaccine. So, I mean, tell everybody you know that if you really, really want to stop this, start life as normal, traveling internationally, et cetera, then people have to get vaccinated, or we're going to continue to see cases and contagiousness, because it is very contagious. So we definitely have community transmission. Our cumulative positivity rate today at Kootenai Health, which does the bulk of our testing in Kootenai County, was at 13.5%. Average 7-day positivity rate at 10%. You know, we really want to see that positivity rate a lot less than 10%. Look at our different counties, and Kootenai, actually Shoshone has the highest community transmission. I mean, their population is much less, so it takes not as many cases to move the needle. But Kootenai is maintaining, you know, a very orange kind of 20% plus cases per 100,000 population. So back to vaccines and how many in Kootenai County have been vaccinated. You know, the really good news, sort of good news, I guess, is if those over 65, 69.4 of them have had at least 1% of them have had at least one dose. 63.7% of them have had 2 doses. In Idaho as a state, at 1 dose, we're at 75.2%. And at completely vaccinated at 2 doses, 71.1 for those that are over 65. For those that are 12 to 64, and that's a large group, and you can go down and drill down on the state Corona website if you're really interested and want to know what's going on. You know, we're at 28%. We're at 28% with 1 dose and 23.7 with 2. Nationally, and as a reminder, in Idaho or in North Idaho, 1 dose, 69.4%. Nationally, we're at 85.9% of those that are over 65, and at 2 doses, 63.7, and nationally at 74.8. So yeah, we've COVID's going to be around for a while, and hopefully it's going to just become like a flu, like something that people can choose to get vaccinated. I mean, people die from the flu this year, not so much, because of some of the things that were put in place with distancing and masks. We really have not seen much flu at all this year. We have seen COVID. We've had 306 people in North Idaho die from COVID. 306 people in North Idaho die from COVID. Flu, I think the worst year I can remember in my tenure here at the health district, there were 39 deaths in North Idaho, which was way high from flu. Generally speaking, it's much lower than that. So whether people choose to take COVID seriously or not is totally up to them. But COVID is going to continue to ignore all of our community's attempts to ignore it. I would not be surprised if in the next 2 weeks, because it's always 2 weeks behind, because there's the transmission, you know, it takes a week or 2 for that virus to do its deal. But we're going to see an uptick due to Memorial Day. Maybe, you know, maybe not, because we're outside now, which is really good. So stay outside and enjoy that sunshine. And with that, I think I have used my time, Miss Carrie.
Thank you, Laura. Does anyone have any questions for Laura?
I look forward to Sam.
I do. Laura, should we be getting our flu vaccine now?
You know, the flu vaccine, what is it? It's July. Generally speaking, we don't even receive the flu vaccine because, you know, they make the flu vaccine, they start looking in February and deciding what to put in it. They look at what's circulating in China and, you know, decide what, you know, there's A's and B's and what, you know, what seems to be the most prevalent. Always try to get the quadrivalent, because there's always, I mean, there's a tri and a quad. But the quad last year had 2 A's and 2 B's. I generally get my flu shot around October.
Okay.
But you know, anywhere from August through February, March, and then a new flu vaccine is developed. It's different every year. Good question, Liz.
I have a quick question on what's the concern with mental wellness and mental health? It seems that COVID has had an impact on that as well.
Thanks, Mark. And we've all, we've all experienced the isolation, I guess, that COVID has caused, the lack of social interaction, some more than others. There's increased drinking, who hasn't had an extra glass of wine during COVID, and some even more. So that's all contributed, and I think there's a delay, a delay in reporting. It's been going on for some time, but people are starting to look at it. I look at suicides in North Idaho with some regularity, and we had 10 more than in 2020 than we did in 2019. What are we going to see in 2021? Yeah, there's certainly effects of just the, even this Zoom meeting, right? When's the last time you were in a face-to-face meeting in a room? I mean, they're starting to happen with more frequency, and that's good. But yeah, it's social interaction, lack thereof, Mark, that has really triggered, an increase in depression, an increase in or exacerbation of whatever people may be experiencing. So, the important thing is reach out to folks. If you think that they're in trouble, talk to them about it. I mean, there was an article today, mental health providers are just at their books are full, right? The clients that are seeking help, which is good that folks are seeking help. And the other piece of that is, of course, opioid use, substance use disorder. It's been all over the front page of the press in recent days about the unintentional overdoses from this, some bad fentanyl or some, people are using drugs and not intentionally, maybe, not intentionally killing themselves, but it's happening. It's happening to our youth. And as I'm sure you're all aware, drug addiction is a horrible thing. I mean, people will, if they're truly addicted to opioids, they'd rather, they'll chew their arm off. Is one of the things I read that really struck me in order to get that next high. I mean, it's a really bad addiction, very difficult to come off of. So, whatever support that we as a community can provide, that's what we got to do.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. I appreciate you taking a couple questions and for taking time to share with us that information. And we will look a little bit later at some of the impacts that COVID has had on the ALICE population, which is our first primary focus. But Sam, I would like to turn it over to you. If you are able to host and share, you've got the rights to.
Sure. Trying to explain everything that happened in the economy in like 10 minutes is difficult, but we're going to do our best to hit a couple of the high points. So let me know if you're seeing a large landscape. Somebody nod. Okay. So we're just going to, like I said, we're just going to run through and try to hit a couple of the highlights from what happened in the past year. I'm glad we did health first, because if you haven't heard about the virus, this isn't going to make much sense. So glad we got that out of the way. So essentially what happened was the US economy went through the largest contraction that we've ever measured in one quarter. So it was deeper than the Great Depression, and it happened essentially in 1 month. Pretty much all of the damage happened in April of 2020, and then you get a little more drop in May. And we were watching this happen in real time, and we're watching Idaho's unemployment rate climb. And we're just kind of waiting for the data to come in and see how bad it is. And then we started getting wage data, and we noticed something really weird, which was that in Idaho, wages kept going up. Okay, so what this graph is showing you is the year-over-year change in the amount of wages paid. So this is kind of a good way to look at the overall amount of work being done. And we broke it up by quarter in 2020. And you can see the drop for the US, the black bar. So wages and salaries dropped by 4% in Q2, but in Idaho, they actually went up. And then our growth numbers in Q3 and Q4 were huge, more than 6% year over year in Q4. So this was very confusing to us because we watched the unemployment rate spike, we watched the national economy crash, and then all of this wage data comes in, and it actually looks like Idaho just kind of like blew right through it. And so this was a little confusing to us. And the more data that's come in, the better picture that we have of this. And so essentially, what we had in Idaho was a scenario where, at least on the economic side, people kind of bought the like 2 weeks to slow the spread kind of thing, the idea that this would be a very, very temporary shutdown. I think that intuitively kind of a lot of us knew it was going to be a lot more than 2 weeks because like a massive respiratory pandemic doesn't just stop on a dime, but at least on the economic sphere, that seems to be what people expected. So if we look at the number of unemployment claimants, you can see, I'm using the same color scheme here. So black is the US, blue is Idaho. You can see it spike in April, and then it just completely drops off a cliff in the summer months. So something really weird happened with Idaho where the perception, at least on the economic side and the business side, was that COVID was something very temporary. And the moment there was a little leeway, everybody went back to work. And so the net effect was that we just kind of blew past the recession. So Idaho is one of only 2 states that did not have a drop in income in Q2, the other being Utah. Currently, we are the only state where total employment is higher now than it was before COVID. So every other state in the country is still contracted to a certain extent. A lot of states are close. Like if you look at Utah, Utah's down like 1.5%. So they've made up most of their job losses. Idaho, we blew completely through it and we actually had a growth year. So this is what employment looks like in Idaho. You can see this big drop, but then we bounce hard off the bottom. We get most of those jobs back by the summer. And then by the start of this year, by the start of 2021, we've completely blown past the break-even point and we're just like back on our trend line. So this was very, very confusing. Somehow through a sheer like Nietzschean quest for willpower, we defied everything that happened in every other state and got all our jobs back and income is back up and everything seems to be fine from an economic perspective for Idaho. So it's very weird. Now, this of course creates some different sorts of challenges, which I'll talk about momentarily. The one thing that we need to know though is that there was a split in terms of how fast the economy bounced back. So what I've done here is I've chopped up all the jobs by wage. So the blue is people who were earning under $16 an hour. So I'm looking at their wage before COVID, before COVID started. And then purple is 16 to 28, green is 28 or more dollars an hour. So what you'll notice is that the jobs for lower wage workers dropped a lot more, a lot faster, and they stayed depressed for longer. So most of the jobs, and then this is just running through February, we're still waiting on some updated data. So if you look at which jobs came back fastest, it was the higher paying jobs. Lower wage jobs were much more sluggish. So if you look at Idaho by industry, every industry in Idaho has grown year over year. So they've completely made up all the losses, except for some service sector industries like leisure and hospitality, consumer services. So it's very important that when we look at these top line numbers, we'll just go back. When we look at this number, we need to be aware that this growth is being driven by higher income sectors. Lower income sectors are still trailing a little bit behind. So that's important because it means that it's lower wage workers, so those who are the most economically vulnerable to begin with, that had to deal with extended unemployment. Most higher wage workers really did not have any extended unemployment. They probably didn't lose their job at all. They probably just went to work from home. If they did lose their job, they probably went back to work very quickly. The other thing to note is that this is also being driven partially by just an insane amount of activity in real estate and construction. Both of those industries grew 8% last year, which is absolutely insane. That would be a crazy growth number in a normal year. You normally don't see industries growing by more than 2 or 3 percentage points in a year. They both grew by 8% amidst a nationwide, economic catastrophe. So it's really unique what's happened here in Idaho. So the other thing that I have to talk about, of course, is housing, because this graph is just insane to me. We all know that the price of housing is probably the main economic problem that we have to solve here in Idaho, is the availability of affordable housing. So this is showing you the year-over-year appreciation of homes in Idaho. And it's important to note not just how crazy this curve is, how fast it's accelerating, but also that even the lowest third of the job market, or of the housing market, has appreciated significantly year over year. So Idaho is very unique in that we are not suffering an extended economic crash as a result of COVID. We kind of just blew past it and willed our way out of it somehow. But that comes with a different set of challenges. So in our case, that challenge is affordable housing and the availability of labor. So we know that construction was disrupted by COVID, not only people being unable to work a bit in the spring, but also just the shortage of raw materials. This is a huge issue for housing at this point. Shortage of lumber, copper, all sorts of things that go into homes, not enough construction workers. So these problems were actually exacerbated by COVID. And that's a really unique situation to be in. For most states, COVID created a whole new set of problems. For Idaho, it just made our existing problems much worse. So you can see that housing was a big problem. I mean, that looks like a big hump in 2019, and then it just runs out of control in recent months. And this is probably the main thing that we have to resolve in our area, is the affordable housing problem. The main problem with housing from my perspective is that it's hard to figure out what the craziest stat is to throw out. Like that there are twice as many realtors as there are homes in inventory. So I don't know how that's working for them. It's like this market is really quite unprecedented. In terms of price appreciation, it completely blows out of the water what we were seeing in 2007 before the housing crash. And then the important thing to note is that this is probably not going to slow down anytime soon, because as we know, it's being fueled by money from coastal markets. And the difference in prices between these markets is just so insane that even the prices we're seeing here are not a deterrent to people looking to move here. So homes in Idaho could essentially triple in value, and they would still look affordable to people moving from the Bay Area or some of the nicer Seattle suburbs, et cetera. So it's running out of control, and it doesn't seem like it's going to stop anytime soon. So just to try to summarize where we're at, in Idaho, we have labor shortages. Everywhere else, the problem is that the jobs haven't come back and you have high unemployment. In Idaho, the problem is that we don't have enough workers. So our unemployment rate is very low. Right now in the state of Idaho, there are about 3 times as many job postings as there are unemployed people. So this is just a musical chairs situation. There's a mismatch. There's not any good way to fix it. So that's good news for workers because it drives wages up, but it is causing inflation. It is causing higher prices. We're seeing that especially in housing. The other thing we need to remember is that lower wage workers are getting back to work at a much more sluggish pace than higher earners. So when we look at the top line number, the top line number is good. We're glad that Idaho is growing, but within that, there's definitely 2 different economies. There was a Zoom economy that is just kind of blasted ahead, and then there's the service sector economy that's still sluggish to pick up. And finally, any hopes we had that COVID would maybe slow down our housing market, we quickly saw that the reverse was actually true. COVID seems to have accelerated our housing market. It made people more urgent to move out of congested areas. And the move to telework has allowed working age people to move to Idaho as well. So instead of just retirees, we're used to mostly retirees moving here. We had more of a mix last year with working people who were able to work remotely and stay job attached. So all of this kind of just sums up to this: Idaho is a very unique case. I'm trying not to use the word weird, that's frowned upon, but it's literally the only state that grew last year. And so unlike everywhere else where the problem is a good old-fashioned recession, here all our pre-existing problems got worse due to COVID. So that's my maybe not, it's maybe not super optimistic, but I think these are better problems to have than being in Nevada, right? Because we don't really want 18% unemployment. That's never fun for anybody. So these are interesting problems to have, but I think all things considered, we'll probably take it. So I don't know how I'm doing on time. Maybe I have time for a question or two.
Carrie, could I ask a question?
Of course, go ahead.
Thanks. So Sam, you say we have to figure it out, this housing crisis. I mean, it's different than the 07 recession or housing crash, as it were. I mean, a lot of people are paying cash for these houses. How do we solve this problem? I mean, when do you see it ending? I mean, how is it going to end?
There needs to be some sort of solution from the supply side, because the problem is twofold. One is that we don't have a big enough construction industry. We need to build more houses, so we need more labor. Raw materials are a problem, but hopefully that will be alleviated as the pandemic subsides. But we also need to look at the type of housing that we're building. It's a big problem, not just in Idaho, but around the country. There really was not any attention to building entry-level housing for first-time home buyers over the last couple decades. So if you think of the housing market as like a ladder of quality, there's like a missing rung. We've built lots of apartments, and then we've built lots of really nice subdivisions that are just out of reach for most people trying to buy their first home. And then you can hardly blame builders for it, but with the type of clientele that's coming here and the amount of money they have, obviously there's more attention to the luxury side of the market because there's money to be made there, and building companies have to make money. So you can't exactly blame them for it. I don't really blame builders for it. It's just what has happened in this country is neglect of the first rung on the housing ladder and entry-level housing. So that's why home ownership rates are so low for millennials. And I think COVID probably set them back even farther, just because of what it's done to ignite the housing market in suburban areas. And then more broadly, what we're seeing is with teleworking, there's like a ripple effect. People are moving out of the urban cores and they're moving into the suburbs of big cities. So if you look at the really congested inner parts of our big cities, those are the areas that are losing people. The suburbs of those cities are actually gaining people. And then those suburbs in turn are spitting people out into smaller metro areas like ours. And all the way up the chain, there has been a neglect of entry-level housing. So we need to build more houses, and we need to build a slightly different mix of houses.
All right, thank you, Sam. And let's see, I think we have Vicki that's going to kind of backbone a little bit off of that as well. Let me see here. Let me pull up your slides, Vicki.
Okay. The only thing good about me being able to follow Sam is that I get to brag about being the one to hire him, because he's great. And I know we all love hearing his presentations. So miss working with Sam.
Well, I'm excited to hear from you because I do think that there's a nice transition here from that financial stability into the education and how those two interact with each other. So let me just start that, and just let me know when you want me to advance your slide.
Okay, I'm going to go pretty quick through them because I think the very last slide is going to be the one that we want to key in on. But I just wanted to tell you all a little bit about what we do first at Workforce Training, and then we'll talk more about kind of what's going on and some of the things that Sam mentioned. But the Workforce Training Center is located out in Post Falls, kind of behind where the old factory outlets used to be. You know, we have this location here that was designed for the non-credit programs to be responsive to the community and develop programs that we could get out rapidly and very flexible, in a very flexible manner. We have our main campus downtown that you're all probably very familiar with, and we also have our Parker Technical Center out next to K-Tech High School in Lancaster in the Rathdrum area. So 3 locations. You can go ahead and go to the next one. So our vision at Workforce Training is really to just strengthen our role in workforce and economic development. As I mentioned, we want to be adaptable. We want to respond rapidly and develop meaningful partnerships throughout our community, come up with new innovative workforce programs so we can resolve those issues like the lack of workers in industries like construction that Sam mentioned, and be very flexible so folks are able to access our training when at a time and location that is convenient for them. Go to the next one. I just going to touch really quick on some of the things that we offer out here in our health professions or health occupations and emergency services. Our largest classes are our CNA classes. I should say the ones run most frequently. We have a lot of individuals interested in becoming CNAs. And what's great about that is once we get them past that certification, many of them will continue to go on and pursue their education further. And Erlene's on your committee here, and they often end up on the credit side and pursuing, you know, LPN, RN, and even taking their education further to other occupations. We also, in addition to the CNA, offer patient care technician, patient care coordinator. Those are kind of advanced CNA skills, restorative assistant, the EMT program, mental health certifications, which we would love to get more of that training out into our community, phlebotomy, dental assisting, medical office, and our medical assistant apprenticeship. In Colleen's arena, Colleen Hoffman's also on this committee, it looks like, and she manages our customized training department, which basically is developing unique solutions for our local employers for training. So if we don't have something that's already developed and available, then she works with our local employers to develop new classes and programs and deliver it on site at our location, their location, just basically work with them to be flexible and figure out what they need and how we can get that to them in a cost-effective manner. Go to the next one. Our apprenticeship programs, you're probably really familiar with. You hear about electrical, plumbing, and HVAC most often as apprenticeship. There are probably nearly 1,000 apprenticeable occupations now, but these are the 3 most common and is our largest program out here. We're working on developing additional programs in construction, however, and to piggyback again on Sam's presentation, we do have a huge shortage of construction workers. And so we're in the process. We just completed a large survey of our community and those contractors to ask them, you know, what their greatest needs are. So we're going to be pulling those employers together in a couple of weeks, trying to work with them to see if we can identify maybe some available grants to get some short-term training programs and see if we can help upskill some individuals in our community that might be able to fill some of those vacant positions. Go to the next one. Workforce development. We have, you know, firefighting out here, commercial driver's license, the CDLs, welding, business and professional programs like computer training, you know, Word, Excel, supervisory training, and other technical trainings as well. We also administer the Mine Safety and Health Administration program for the entire state. So our instructor, Jason, travels around Idaho and does a lot of new miner and underground safety type classes. Once a year, we have a wonderful program called Safety Fest that Colleen also oversees and facilitates that. And we have hundreds of individuals that come through our door over a 3-day period to access tons of different types of safety related training, anything from, OSHA, stop the bleed classes, forklift certifications, flagging, all kinds of training available. So watch for that in 2022. So hopefully you can come take part in some of that free training. And again, that is open to anybody. Go to the last slide, I think. So just wanted to touch on really what we do at workforce training, but not really to necessarily make sure you're aware of that as much as you're aware of really what Sam touched on. And he talked about the lower wage workers being the ones that saw the most loss through COVID in their positions, and the closures that happened and everything like that. It was those higher wage workers, which likely those individuals are the ones that have some sort of credential or degree. I've heard Sam in some presentations in the past kind of use that, you have a credential or degree of some sort, you're more pandemic proof or more recession proof, as an individual. That's really the message that we need to continue to promote in our community to help with that financial stability. We want to make sure that, whether someone is interested in a short-term training program or, a degree, we want to make sure that that funding is not a barrier, and more funding seems to be coming available to help individuals to get into a certain career path or to just upskill and upgrade the skills that they currently have to hopefully get them into those higher wage positions. So that's the message that we really want to get out to the community. Don't let funding be a barrier to continuing education or to even getting started. NIC has access to or has available all kinds of scholarships money. I think we're over $1 million at the institution now, whether that's for credit or non-credit. There's a lot of money available through scholarships. Through Department of Labor, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act has hundreds of thousands of dollars available to individuals that are off work due to no fault of their own, or that are low income individuals in the ALICE population. There's a new program in Idaho called Idaho Launch that individuals can go onto a website and just punch in some basic information, and it sets up an appointment with staff that actually are at the Department of Labor to determine whether or not they can qualify for funding under WIOA or under a new pot of funds that was made available by the Workforce Development Council in Boise. Through that, they can get a voucher for certain training programs and pay up to 90%. In some cases, if they can prove that they're off work due to COVID related reasons, they can get up to 100%, I believe, maybe for the next couple of weeks or month, and then it goes back down to that 75 to 90%. But that's a huge chunk. Someone wants to get a commercial driver's license and it could pay $35 of the $3,800, approximately for that. So it's another funding stream to be aware of. The college has workforce training anyways, and I think the main campus does too, and Arlene can vouch for this, but we have payment plans available. Of course, there's financial aid that people can apply for, grants and loans through there. And then because of COVID, there's a lot of CARES Act funding out there. And some of you may have worked with CARES Act in some way, but there's a lot of funding that is coming to North Idaho College and has already come to North Idaho College. Mark Tucker and I were just on a meeting for the last hour and a half discussing this with several people around the campus, trying to determine exactly what that looks like. But that funding can come in a number of ways. It may be for new students, it may be for existing students, it may help for emergencies that they had to pay for that they weren't expecting to pay for during the pandemic. It could pay for educational resources if they had to buy equipment or supplies to do online learning when they were expected to be in the classroom. There's lots of lots of funding streams that are available now and that will become available. So the main thing is that people just need to get in touch with us here at Workforce Training or with our main campus at NIC and just ask for assistance, ask what's available, ask how to get started, ask how to apply for scholarships. We will find them some assistance. And I mean, I can't guarantee it 100%, but it just should not be a barrier. And that's the message that we need individuals to be aware of, is just start small. If, you know, there's a lot of people taking entry-level positions instead of thinking about that long-term career path right now, because they're driving by places like KFC, where this morning I saw $15 an hour for cooks. You know, so our youth, our entry-level workers, they're able to get that wage that has been considered to be a decent wage in our area for a long time. And they're jumping at that opportunity, but they're not thinking about it long-term. If there's some way that we can just encourage them to get started, to start thinking about their career path and start taking classes or working towards some sort of credential on the side, you know, nights, weekends, or fitting that in during the day, depending on what kind of schedule they have. They just need to, you know, ask for assistance of how do I do that? What will work for me? How do I figure out, you know, what is next for me and how I can take that to the next level? I listed employer sponsors on here as well, because every employer I talk to is hiring right now. And every employer says, what can I do? What am I going to do? And the message that I've been discussing with them is you need to really figure out how you can stand out amongst other businesses in our community. And the way to do that is support people in showing them what that progression could be as a career pathway, you know, within your business. So some of the employers are really considering providing those financial incentives or the financial backing to help pay for schooling or training. And that's really great to see. So they're just looking for opportunities like that they can retain their current workforce and help them get to that next level, especially if they're looking to get to that next level within their own company or organization. So encourage folks, you know, that are unemployed or underemployed to be asking those questions and to be checking with their employer to see if they will support them, even if they don't already have something like that displayed in their, you know, benefit package. But lots of other opportunities out there for them to upgrade their skills. And we just need to get folks to think along those lines and look long-term of where they want to be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and so forth. So any questions, or I don't know if there's even time for questions, but that's all I have.
Well, I think this is great information, because something that we have talked about quite a bit in our internally and that I hear around the community is how many businesses are hiring. And so I think that kind of keeping in mind, especially as we find opportunities to maybe support youth programs or financial stability programs, thinking about connecting with these pathways to career options rather than sort of an entry level role, and knowing that there's funding assistance available. Other questions for Vicki or Sam? Okay, so let's see, I gotta find my PowerPoint. Oh no, that one's yours. So I had certainly intended to find someone to share with us a little bit more about the kind of regional scope of education. But what we found is some really great presenters on health and financial stability, and realized that some of the work that we've been doing internally here and in collaboration around early education is a lens that we'd like to take a look at, and it is pretty important here. And part of that really ties into what we know about the importance of early care and education, and that it creates a foundation for the educational and employment success of that child's lifespan, their family's lifespan. So we look at this from the lens of quality childcare and early care and education being synonymous. There's, early care is education, and the impacts that it has on children's families, local businesses. So Vicki, you mentioned something to that effect of employers being so desperate and wondering what they can do. And in some areas, we're seeing that those businesses offering some kind of childcare benefit can be a support to an incentive to coming to work. There's impacts on the school system, of course, childcare providers, the community, and children's futures. So over the last year, we have invested pretty heavily in early care and education in two substantial ways. One is direct to family scholarships. We received some CARES Act funding that helped us support tuition supplements to families in the 5 northern counties. And that happens on a monthly reimbursement basis. But some of the data that came out of that is a high proportion, majority female, majority single parent households, and majority working full time. These are women of 32, 33. We had some younger teen parents, but really not so much. 32 is the average age. Average cost of childcare is $750 a month per child. And then an interesting note here, this is correlated here. So this $2,700 monthly take-home pay is the average. For a family size of 3, $2,300 is what makes them eligible for Idaho Child Care Assistance. And so this 67% not eligible for state benefits because they're making just a few $100s over that income limit. And in these scholarships, which typically tend to span between 3 and 5 months, 53% reported that the scholarship enabled them to stay and work in school. 45% reported that the scholarship allowed them to catch up on bills. However, over half are unable to pay for the tuition after the scholarship ends. So we're still working on different solutions to provide that concrete support for those families that are unable to continue paying. Childcare providers, to Sam's point that COVID made existing problems worse. COVID really shone a light on the deep infrastructural cracks in our childcare provider community. So when I speak about childcare providers, I'm talking about everything from small home-based single individual watching 3 to 6 children, all the way up to institutions such as NIC Children's Center or Kootenai Health that has hundreds of children in a center, multiple classrooms. They all really suffered. So we were able to leverage some COVID funding as well as some private grants to provide over $30,000 in direct financial support. This is again around the 5 northern counties, and nearly 1,000 children represented in those centers were impacted. And what that means is that those, not only in quality improvement, so curriculum, materials, but licensing compliance is really huge. So having background checks, comprehensive background checks, and safety training for those employees who are, as you may or may not know, making around 9 to 10 an hour. So at the very poverty level wages that makes up the personnel among childcare providers, but making sure that they have the tools at minimum to provide a safe environment for these children. When COVID happened, or I should say when the state shut down, it was voluntary for childcare providers to shut down. However, so many of them did because families pulled out. A lot of providers were in a high risk age range, but also providers had an extremely difficult time being able to weather this emergency because they operate on very small margins. So a 2-week loss of income meant that they could not pay their mortgage, they couldn't pay their staff, couldn't afford to reopen. And so 70% closed down, and this is in the state of Idaho, about 40% of those stayed closed as of, I want to say, November of last year. So they were unable to reopen indefinitely. However, some of this has elevated childcare to the national conversation in ways that it hasn't before. So it's the diaspora of people out of the workforce, and particularly women, who have left due to family care needs has elevated the need for childcare as infrastructure as essential in the economic recovery. And it has, as I said, come to the national conversation in ways that are creating pathways, I hope, and we're trying to promote and leverage that attention, those pathways to create a case for whole community investment in early care and education infrastructure, both from the side of employers through state level investment, creating family, friend, and neighbor networks so that families can better weather those fluctuations or income disruptions. We'll have some more, I'll share a little bit more on that in a minute. But one thing that I did want to point out as well, or bring to light for our school readiness and community care fund investments, is that we are in our 4th year of a 2-year reimbursement from the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. It's a Child Care Development Fund subgrant that allows us up to a 60% reimbursement for investments made in pre-K through school age, so up to age 13. Programs and services. And so community care fund investments that meet that criteria are eligible for reimbursement, meaning that we can leverage additional funding back into our community. So in 2021, we, along with our early care and education task force, which is comprised of public, private, business, early education, parents, schools, were awarded a preschool development grant, sort of an allocation from the state, Idaho Association for the Education of Young Children, to conduct a needs assessment and strategic plan for Bonner and Kootenai counties. Some of our findings underlined the need for investment in the workforce and the infrastructure. So of those surveyed, 83% had a high school education or less. There is a need for professional development and increasing the skills and capacity of these adults that are looking after children, particularly in the areas of special needs. We also learned that parents are aware of developmental needs and their role in helping children scaffold those, but don't necessarily know where to go for that. And also how to find quality care, whether it's small, large, meets the hours that they need to work, et cetera. So kind of building an additional education and information network there is of importance. Increasing, of course, equitable access to quality early care and education. So what we found in our inventory of childcare providers is that not only was there insufficient inventory of care for infants and toddlers, because that is the most costly of care, but there are vacancies. So there are a lot of providers who have open slots. However, it is not at a price point that parents can afford. And so creating solutions to bridge that gap in access and availability is a pretty key thing. And again, when families don't have care, they can't get to work or school. And finally, strengthening relationships with not only childcare providers, the childcare provider community, but also developing pathways for that workforce. It is a struggle because the return on investment for a education in early care is still pretty low. So even acquiring a bachelor's degree in early care and education doesn't translate to a much higher wage than what you would have with a high school or associate's level education. But there is some state level work trying to bring power to that profession and elevate that profession. So you can find additional information about that needs assessment and the strategic plan on our website. The preschool development grant in 2020 is this federal pool of funds that is allocated to each state. That each state has to have governor's approval to apply for it. And in 2020, we were able to do that and awarded $1 million for that. However, in 2021, the state was awarded again $18 million over 6 years to invest throughout the state, but because of the scope and scale, it was recommended that it be allocated to the Department of Education, which meant it had to be a legislative approval. there was some unexpected hurdles and misinformation about what that grant would entail for children. And in the end, it was not heard, which left an unprecedented pool of funds on the table for Idaho. The local impact would have been $100,000 a year over 3 years to support our North Idaho collaborations and implementations of strategic plans. But we did have an opportunity to catalyze a lot of education outreach and direct advocacy to our legislators, stakeholders, and I will say specifically around business engagement and realizing that early care and education or access to childcare has become a business issue. And so those are ways that we're working on implementing our strategic actions, even though we don't have the PDG funding available to us at this point. We understand that it is still a high need and a highly urgent need for working families today and for children's futures. So, Mark, may I turn it over to you to share a little bit? Oh, I'm sorry. Any questions about education, early care and education from this lens? All right. So, Mark, if you don't mind taking it away to speak a little bit about our COVID Relief Fund.
Sure. I don't recall who initiated the conversation, but there were a few organizations that created the CDA COVID Relief Fund. Obviously, the Idaho Community Foundation and Innovia Foundation each had larger relief funds that were created, but there was a concern for the local population. And at the table initially, I know the Panhandle Health District was obviously there, the Coeur d'Alene Chamber, St. Vincent de Paul, CDA, and a few others in the city. And what we really wanted to do is, one was identify the populations who we felt would locally be most impacted, and then to determine a process of how to award those funds and evaluate who the need was for. So there were 4 categories basically for the relief fund: pre-K youth, school-age youth, hospitality and service industry workers, so primarily Alice, and then vulnerable seniors. So on the chart here, you can see that we granted out over $114,000, and this was through, I believe it was 54 different grants. And so the breakdown obviously has more than the 4 categories, but you see the Alice population, that's a lot of the service industry, some transitional housing, and those as well as hospitality were that one category I mentioned. Childcare obviously was a significant chunk on its own, K-12 youth as well. The vaccination access was primarily for seniors, but not solely for seniors. So that's what wraps up those last amounts. And I think, excuse me, really what was great to see about the collaboration of that process was how we were able to utilize the work that we have done in establishing our community impact councils and how that grant awarding and review process works. So we took providers in those 4 areas I mentioned who know those industries best and had them help us review applications as well as do outreach to organizations that were providing those services. And then we had a leadership team that would approve the recommendations. So it was a 2-step process. We had the right people in place. And then we were obviously fortunate enough to have Carrie on board who manages this process and manage the COVID relief one as well. So I think it worked really well. Couple other brief United Way updates, just state of our organization. We are seeing a decline in revenue from corporate, not from corporate contributions, but workplace campaigns. We obviously had to cancel a couple of events like most nonprofits. Our grant funding was up, so that helped. And we were also, over the past several years, for those of you that have been on the impact councils for a while, have seen that, we've changed. Do we do every other year? Do we do twice a year? Do we do once a year? And then we also shifted to the cash-based instead of pledge-based amounts. So that's where we took a little bit of a break on the review process, but it put us in a really strong position financially. So with the PPP loans, as well as that planning and ahead of time, thought ahead of time, we were able to hire another position for resource development. So hopefully that will continue our strong financial position and get us back to a place where we're growing the revenue. With that being said, we can always use help in connecting to companies for workplace campaigns, as well as those who you may feel would want to invest in this type of work, and also to help with the stories. So that's my revenue pitch. But if you have any connections or ideas or thoughts about wanting to share this story or help us share this story of the great work that you guys are doing, it would really be helpful for us. And then one final little bragging point is we did win Nonprofit of the Year from the Coeur d'Alene Regional Chamber. So that's something that's pretty exciting, and I'm proud of our team and the work that we've done this past year. All right, I hope I didn't take too much of my time.
Thank you, Mark. That was great. And so just one other point that I wanted to make here, and again, connecting the dots with our impact area presenters for Panhandle, Department of Labor, Workforce Training, is there's certainly some specific impacts on ALICE families, or as we've heard it referenced, lower wage workers, that are pretty substantial. And I'm sure that of you folks here, this is not surprising, but over the last year, we've seen these play out in different ways. So more than a quarter of households below the ALICE threshold don't have adequate internet access, which compromise participation in e-learning. I would also say locally, what things that I heard from families who needed to school their children at home was a frustration that they didn't have the flexibility in their workplace to do that. And so that's kind of bullet point 2. Parents who need to work cannot stay at home with their children and needed to scramble to find care situations, or felt, and I completely, and one of these parents felt that I did not have the skills or capacity to be a first grade teacher to a child that was not used to being taught by me. And that led to a lot of frustration. And Mark, I would connect another dot to some of that mental health and isolation. So another point here is ALICE families can lose access to other supports, such as free or reduced price provided school meals. Fortunately, in the Coeur d'Alene district, free and reduced lunch, well, free lunch was made available to all children. That continued through the summer and the school year, and that I believe will continue through the summer again. Our organizations in this community and in Bonner County as well are the ones that I'm most familiar with, have stepped up to provide additional supports to families. So scholarships for service industry workers that have children and want to engage in out of school summertime activities. There's dollars available for that. We have great libraries who have invested in mobile hotspots so that those without regular access to internet can at least check out a hotspot and access that. But I do think that we have some substantial housing issues facing us for individuals who had severe income disruptions, were able to stay in their homes because of the federal moratorium and eviction, but are now facing eviction and housing instability and experiencing homelessness as a result of the last year. All right, April, can I tee this up to you for updates on our Impact Council goals and what is our goals and priorities for this year? Do we have sound? Oh, thank you, Vicky, who's jumping off. I appreciate you.
It doesn't look like April's on still.
Oh, no. All right. Well, guess what, you guys? You get me. All right. So our Community Care Fund Impact Council goals for this year really have to do with, oh gosh, am I frozen now? Okay, there we go. So I'm not going to go too much into integrating the diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment because Sydney is going to share that with us, but retaining chairs for each council. So we do have Sherry Dickinson, who has agreed to stay on and continue the next year as the chair for the Financial Stability Council. Thank you so much. We are reaching out to a few individuals for the chairs of those health and education councils. However, if you're interested, it's best if you do have a year under your belt for this role. But if you're interested or have a nomination, you can reach out to April or I, and we'll be trying to secure those before the second Impact Council orientation, which is that evaluation orientation, and that's going to be in September. One of the areas that the issues that we discussed most recently in our board meetings and retreat is the allocations to impact areas and how we manage those allocations vis-a-vis the requests. One of the things that we have learned over the past few years, which I'll go to the next slide to show that, is that health gets the majority, the highest ask in terms of financial requests as well as number of applications. And so some of that has to do with how we reallocated, how we reorganized what programs go into health versus what goes into financial stability and education when we had brought on our local results framework. And so part of what we are considering is taking a case-by-case look at applications that come in this new cycle, and if there is a way to shift the metrics that they are that organization is collecting to even out the number of applications and dollars requested to across the impact areas, that we would work with that organization to do that, so that, for example, health is not needing to make a decision about 15 organizations and financial stability has 2. We want to be able to kind of spread that out a little bit in the way that makes sense and still holds the integrity to our goals and our local results framework. So this is just a snapshot of our last grant year. This shows here our number of programs, which you can see here in this column, the dollars requested and the dollars allocated, just as a snapshot for last year. As if you've been on the council, you know what we funded, but we have our grantees in education here. We broke out, of course, the last couple of years, the school readiness or early education programs distinct from youth success. We have 2 great organizations, Financial Stability and in Financial Stability, CD8 and the Postal Food Bank. And then in health, we have a kind of a mix of food nutrition programs, infant safety and maternal interventions, family and domestic violence services, and then a small grant went to the warming center. April, I see you back on here. Hello.
Hello. I lost connection there and I couldn't get back in. I'm actually just called in now, so.
Great. So I touched on this bullet point 1, how do we best balance allocations between the impact areas? And I'm wondering if you want to take bullet 2, what outreach can be made to better connect all 5 northern counties?
So that is something that we would like to work on, is our outreach and how we can improve that. It seems like we have a lot of agencies that know about United Way and they apply every year pretty consistently. We would just like to be able to open it up to other non And that includes all of our 5 northern counties, not just Kootenai County. So if you guys have ideas or things that you would like to share on how we can get that information out there.
A pretty bad connection here with you, April. You kind of cut out into a robot voice, but I think what you are trying to say is asking our Impact Council members to assist in the outreach and invitation of organizations around the 5 northern counties to apply. Okay. Sorry, April, I don't mean to cut you off, but I can't hear you. So I'm going to go over to Sydney because again, that final point for us in our goals is what steps should be taken to help ensure we're diverse in meeting our DEI statement when allocating grants. So Sydney, if you're ready to go, I can mute myself and turn it over to you.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, so I guess I wanted to take a second and kind of in a similar way where Laura was sharing about COVID-19 and being very direct about an issue that's been maybe a little unfortunately divisive in our community, take a similarly direct stance with our position here at United Way of North Idaho. And Carrie, you can go ahead and go to our next slide. So over this past year, along with COVID, I think we've all noticed that our country has been going through something of a reckoning in terms of racial justice. And actually, United Way Worldwide has updated their membership requirements to include some very specific diversity, equity, and inclusion-oriented steps and expectations for all local United Ways. And one of those first expectations that they laid out was that we establish a specific diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, which Carrie has included here. And so what we state is that United Way of North Idaho aspires to live in an inclusive community where all individuals have access to resources and opportunity for a life of physical and mental health and fulfillment of their greatest potential. We work to demonstrate these intentions through our decision-making, funding opportunities, and equal opportunity employment. And we acknowledge that to truly honor our commitment to a diverse, equitable, and inclusive North Idaho community, we must intentionally recommit ourselves as individuals and as an organization to recognize our implicit biases and respect others' realities, seek out and understand our nation, state, and region's complex history, listen to, understand, and support all cultural and ethnic voices in our community, and leverage our responsibility as a community voice to stand as a strong ally in the effort to dismantle systemic racism and all systems of oppression that exist within ourselves and our community. As such, we embrace an intersectional lens which seeks out and includes representation from individuals of any race, ethnicity, social or economic background, disability, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And Carrie included this in here because one of the things that follows on our webpage is that this applies to the entirety of our organization and all of our volunteers. So as we move forward as a Community Impact Council, we want to make sure that we are upholding the integrity of this statement. And if there are any, if there's any phrasing in here that's confusing, all of the bolded terms in particular on our website are defined for us. So it's right at that link, uwnorthidaho.org/DEI if you want to read further. So Carrie, you can go on to the next slide. And so along with the DEI statement, and some internal trainings that our staff members and our board are going to be required to participate in, there also are some specific requirements from United Way Worldwide for our investments. And here at our local United Way, United Way of North Idaho, our community impact councils, you guys are the ones who really influence a lot of these investments. So we wanted to make sure that we were sharing this information with all of you as you move forward with your decision making in this cycle. And so From their guidance, they are expecting us to invest in direct services and supports that align with clearly stated goals to close racial disparities in education, employment, healthcare, criminal justice, and other areas, along with identifying target populations that are experiencing these disparities, and making sure that our investments are quantifiable in terms of specific dollar amounts and percentage of overall resource investment. So I know Carrie sent out the current application process for the community impact grants and was soliciting some feedback. And I will be going through and kind of teasing out some of these requirements and seeing how I see them fitting into this. But Carrie mentioned to me that you all have been a very participatory group in the past, and I would love to see your thoughts on how we can incorporate this into our selection process as well in that application. And so that was just expected of us from our year one. So in 2021, by December, we're expected to complete those expectations on the previous slide. And kind of moving forward, our intentions are to fund initiatives, agencies, and programs that are working to address root causes of systemic racial inequity, to fund state and local policy change and advocacy efforts, to invest in leadership development of BIPOC leaders. So in that sense, I also, I know Carrie and April were talking about reaching out to members of the community to ensure that our council also reflects not just the diversity of our 5 northern counties, but also with maybe more of a diverse racial community as well. So these are things just to keep in mind as we're engaging in that outreach. And Carrie and I had mentioned really trying to seek out, I think oftentimes we talk about how in North Idaho, our community is so majority white, it's really hard to seek out members of kind of more marginalized populations. But I feel like we could really leverage this community and our efforts to identify nonprofits and organizations that are being led by BIPOC leaders and serving historically disadvantaged communities of color. And so I guess that's kind of a whirlwind explanation of those expectations. As we reflect on how we integrate these into our community impact work, again, we talk about benchmarking funds specifically for that racial equity work, making sure that as we're allocating funds in our metrics, we are disaggregating data on disparities by race, as well as other demographic information, making sure that our investments are systemic and aligned with racial and ethnic equity goals, that we are also building capacity at the local level. So I think something that we are requiring of our grant recipients this time around are that they provide their own diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. And if they need any guidance, we can provide ours and maybe a little coaching on how to develop those statements themselves. As I mentioned, we're hoping to mindfully increase the diversity of our impact councils, and we are looking to pair with some larger United Way chapters for peer-to-peer DEI coaching. We had a really great presentation from the CEO over at the United Way in Spokane, and they're doing great work around this as well. So we're looking forward to building those relationships. And also just as a personal challenge for those of you who are interested in engaging in this work, there's so much out there, but United Way Worldwide offered last year what they called a 21-day race equity challenge that was open to staff. And they've recently made it open to everyone in the country. So I'm just dropping that link in the chat, and I think we can follow up with it in an email as well. But if you wanted to sign up, that will be taking place from June 28th through July 18th, but really you can do it on your own time. They send you the emails, and it's just 15 minutes a day. They'll send you an email or a video or a podcast or a short article to read to just kind of help you start thinking about some of these issues that can be really challenging. So I think that's what I have to share. Thanks, Gary.
Awesome. Thank you, Sydney. And stay on because I want to run through this quickly and then just see if folks have questions. So I want to just before we hit the time, give you an overview of what our schedule is for this next few months. So you should have all received your login information to EC Impact. That's our grant management platform. When you log in, you'll be prompted to sign the volunteer agreement and conflict of interest. In the reminder email, I did send I sent a copy of the application, and I will send a copy of the budget. I just need to make sure we have the final one. For suggested updates, if you could get those back to me by June 15th, that would be great. Then I can integrate them and have it ready to go by July 1st. One of our finance committee members took lead on updating our budget because it was pretty confusing and not very useful in that last year, which was the inaugural year of our grant management platform. So I kind of took a template that had been provided, and over time we realized that there was a lot of confusion and questions. So our finance director took care of creating one that is a lot more useful and also has a step-by-step guide for applicants. That budget seems to be something that trips people up a lot. So for current council members, the mid-year reports from our fiscal year 21 investments are all submitted now. Well, at the end of the day, they will all be submitted. And so you'll have an evaluation to complete by June 30th. That's pretty straightforward. We do have a walkthrough step-by-step guide, but essentially you'll see the ones that are assigned to you in your EC Impact platform. You just click on it, you go through, you make your evaluations and then submit it. And those are all good. So the Community Care Fund for fiscal year 22 opens on July 1st. We will have another technical assistance and Q&A session for applicants to help walk through how to apply for that, answer any questions. And that will also be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. Again, we think it's important to provide as much transparency and assistance to applicants as possible so that the opportunity for funding is flattened, more equitable. The grant will close September 30th. That's the deadline for applications. We'll have a training for our council members, for all council members, on how to evaluate those applications on September 29th. So I'll send out a calendar invite for that if you could please mark your calendars. We'll also record that though. The application review from October 1st to November 30th is, so you'll see that I don't have dates in there because that is something that we tend to defer to each council to set those dates based on their team's availability and timelines. We do know that about 6 weeks, no less than 6 weeks, is a good span of time to create the first or complete the first round of application review and scoring. Sending those applications, budgets, and 990s to our finance committee for their review. They often have comments that come back, and so then we have the opportunity to do site visits and interviews, whether in person or in Zoom, to answer those questions, make final recommendations. Then we need all those recommendations back to myself, April, the other board liaisons for the board of directors on December 1st. And we have our final meeting where we vote on those within the first or second week of December, so that we can make those announcements of the awarded applicants by the new year, and they can receive that in the year. So, all right, that concludes this whirlwind orientation, and I would like to open it up for any questions that anybody may have.
Carrie, I had a couple comments. Sydney, thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate that as not only a grant recipient of United Way funding, but as a longtime Impact Council member. I would encourage that presentation to get to the nonprofits that are applying. I think that's really, really important for just our base knowledge of expectations and we're United Ways, you know, all of that information is important for us to know as nonprofits, especially applying for United Way funding. And the other thing I wanted to say is, so our deadline for reporting for 2020 or for the last funding cycle isn't until the end of December. So, so we're not gonna, as impact councils, we're not gonna be able to review final reports from last year's funding for agencies that are applying again this year.
Right. So they do a 6-month report and
Right.
then a year end. And so as an impact council member, you'll be reviewing both, well, the final report for, say, fiscal year 21 applicants is due December 30th. So then as council members, you'll have another month to review those final reports. Does that make sense?
I thought we were making decisions for this year's funding before December.
Oh, we are. Okay, I misunderstood your question then.
Right, like, so I want to review what the nonprofit did with the funding that they got to work on for that they got for work in 2020 before I give them more money.
I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah.
Not
so
me, but us, right?
Yes.
Like us. That's what I mean.
Great question. So say an organization, let's use, we'll pick on Leslie, Postwell's Food Banks, since she's not here. So they received funding in fiscal year 21. They did a 6-month report just turned in today.
Yep.
Let's say they apply for funding again. They won't have their final use of funds report until December 30th, but they apply for new funding. We want to be able to know how that's going.
Yes.
Okay. So I would say we utilize the mid-year report and then detailed interviews, and we have the ability to ask questions, ask for additional budget information within the review for the fiscal year 2020 application, but we wouldn't have their final report until December 30th. After December.
Okay. I mean, I get that. I just feel like we need something more than a mid-year report, because I can tell you my mid-year report, we're halfway done with our project.
Mm-hmm.
So to be good stewards of reviewing,
to
I
take
don't
into
know.
account is you're reviewing new applicants as well as returning applicants.
Yeah.
So really the process doesn't technically include the report. That's only for renewals. I agree there will be a lot, and it would be nice to have more information, but to keep an even playing field, the review process is based on the applications and what we know about the organizations and the site visits and questions and answer period. So I think it's an added bonus if they were previously funded, but it's really, we don't want the grant to be based on prior year reporting, because then we would only be renewing grants. We wouldn't have any new ones.
Yeah, I totally get that. But I guess I just want to make sure that before I give an agency more money, that they're being good stewards of the money that we gave them before. I don't know. I mean, you guys can do whatever you want. That's just would be a concern of mine. So I don't know.
Well, you make a
I don't
good
know what
point.
the answer is either. So
Yeah, you make a good point, and I think that if that is the case where we have an applicant, then I think it would be, the onus could be on the impact councils to ask those critical questions of, hey, we don't have the opportunity yet to see your final use of funds. Can you help us understand how you may have been good stewards of that last round? Because presumably they would be, if they're reapplying for funds, they would need to have some justification at that point, at that September point.
Yeah. Okay.
Good question, Liz. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I will send, of course, follow-up information and detailed tasks, timelines for everybody. But I do want to be respectful of your time.
Carrie, can you do me a favor and email me the list, since I don't have it anymore, and the code to get in, since I don't have that anymore either?
Yes, for EC Impact and the other council members. Yes, I need to update your account. Thank you for mentioning
Thank you.
Great. Well, if there's not anything else, thank you all for your time and for sharing your thoughts and ideas, and of course for being a part of this process. I think one of our greatest strengths as an organization is having a group of volunteers to help evaluate our applications that we get, to show transparency, responsible use of funds, and we couldn't do it without you. I think it's something that as an organization we're really, really proud to be able to do. So thank you. And I know that it can be a heavy lift from October to December, but otherwise, you know, it's a relatively short volunteer commitment that makes a big difference in our community and elevates the work and capacity of these essential organizations that are providing programs and services that really do change lives. Thank you for being a part of it. Okay, we'll talk to you all later. Thank you.